So the presentation that we are going to have today is on the topic when a philosopher and a physicist walk into a bar. What, how, when, and why. Now, I have to tell you that today this is a really big topic, so we can't cover everything today. So this presentation will be broken down into two presentations. So you will see in the case of philosophy, I will be talking about probably what and why, and in the case of physics, I will be talking about what and how. The remaining parts will be discussed in the upcoming presentation, like the next presentation, probably, in which I'll cover the second part of this uh, topic. So what is the aim of this presentation? Like at the end of the day, after the presentation gets over, what do I want you to have? It is to create a mental map of a relationship between philosophy and physics. Remember, the particles A here is stressed because I'm not creating a universal mental map. Don't think that if you have listened to what I have said between philosophy and physics, this is the end, like you know everything or something like that. This is like a part of it. So, for example, the perspectives that we generally encounter in our academics are two: Western and Indian, both in the case of physics as well as in the case of philosophy. That's how we are taught. We are not taught in the sense of South American tradition or African tradition or Japanese tradition or Chinese tradition. We are not, or Russian tradition for that matter. We are not taught in that fashion. We are taught mostly in the sense of Western and Indian. Now, only looking, if you look at the relationship between philosophy and physics, just from the point of view of the West, it is a mental map and a relationship. If you look at from the Indian perspective, then it will be another mental map and another perspective and another relationship. If you look at if you take all the different traditions together, then probably you might say the mental map of the relationship between philosophy and physics. But that's very exhaustive in nature. Trust me, studying one single tradition will your life will get over. I mean, something that's what I have seen. All my professors keep saying that they devoted themselves to a certain tradition, and now it's too late for them to even start with another tradition because another tradition will take a lot of time um, to be for you to become an expert in it. So yeah, so we will two prominent traditions are the Western and the Indian. So Western perspective, the words that we use is philosophy and physics. The genesis, the roots of these words can be traced back to ancient Greece. In the case of philosophy, I think you would have heard. Uh, uh, I mean, I hope you have heard the word philosophy at least, and I think all of us have heard the word physics. Then you have the Indian perspective, in which philosophy as a word gets translated as anvikshiki, which basically means rational inquiry, and physics gets translated into bhautika, which is the study of nature. The genesis of these words can be traced back to scholars across the Indian subcontinent. In the case of Anveshiki, you can say Kautilya, and Bhautiki is something that is prominent in our education system. I mean, if you study if you take up any vernacular subject, I mean, if you take a vernacular language as your first language, then physics will be Bhautiki for you in your schools and colleges. So since said the aim of this presentation is creation of creation of a mental map of a relationship between philosophy and physics, I'll be looking at one of them. I'll be looking at the Western perspective. I would encourage any one of you to do it on Indian perspective, South American perspective, or all the perspectives together. I would like to encourage you to do it, but I'll be doing today on the Western perspective. So since we are doing Western perspective, we will have to take the word philosophy and physics and not Anveshiki and Bhautiki. There is a huge gap between them. So, I mean, there is a huge gap between these two different languages. So the word philosophy is etymologically broken down into the Greek particles, philo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. Therefore, philosophy stands for the phrase, the love for wisdom. Now, I want to stress something out here. When I say the love for wisdom, this is a very important statement in philosophy. The reason being, it's not any other quote that like Warren Buffett gives or Bill Gates gives or any politician or a leader gives. Like they would have given you quotes and you would have read these quotes and it would have resonated with some of your thoughts and it would have inspired you in many things. This is not like that. The love for wisdom is not a quote in that sense. It is a highly argumented quote. argumented quote. The word wisdom has been argued so much in philosophy. The word the word love, the word the word for, all these words has been argued in order to create the statement, the love for wisdom. So it's a serious phrase. So if you ever want to write an article, this is a really good topic to write an article on. Like, what do we mean by the love for wisdom, and why is it an important quote? The word physics has its etymological roots in the Greek article of physis, meaning nature. So, by the way, I'm hoping everybody is looking at the slides from their laptops so that it appears big and everybody are able to read. So we start with the first topic: philosophy, what and why. So as you can see, this is a uh, great image, which in a certain sense illustrates something that is philosophic in nature, and that is transcendental. Like, try to understand every other subjects that you study apart from philosophy does not have a transcendental element in it. Only philosophy has something. I mean, I wouldn't like to say that we have to become hippies and we have to become spiritual. I'm not saying in that sense, but what I'm saying is uh, uh, emancipation can only be achieved by knowledge, and that has a certain uh, essence of transcendence in it. And this image, in a certain sense, beautifully portrays that. This image, as you can see, is a wood engraving that was first appeared in so and so novel in 1888. I would like you guys to go read the novel. It is philosophic in nature. It's a really good novel. It's called Atmosphere, Popular Meteorology. You will understand how people thought during 19th century. Yeah. So, what does philosophy mean? Now, it is important that when we say what does philosophy mean, we have to look at the word itself. I hope that you understand that if you attend a seminar, if you attend a mathematics seminar, you will be looking at a lot of formulas. If you attend a biology seminar, you will be looking at a lot of probably organic images, like anatomy and bones, and you will be looking at those images. This is a philosophy presentation. So I would like to stress this. In philosophy, like in mathematics, you'll be looking at a lot of mathematical equations. Similarly, in philosophy, you'll be looking at a lot of paragraphs. And it is important to read them and to understand what they are trying to tell us. So when I say what philosophy means, we have to be critical about the word itself. So let's look at what philosophy means. And especially since I'm a student of philosophy, we'll be looking at that from a student's perspective. Like the first day you embark on doing any serious philosophy, you will start first reading history of philosophy. So it is a universal assent, meaning agreement, among academic philosophers today that the student of philosophy must be well versed with the history of philosophy before seriously engaging in any philosophical project. Therefore, the paragraph that I've written below it has been taken from a book, which I've quoted in the next page. So, what is philosophy? Since you have to look at it from a historical retrospect, this paragraph has a beautiful answer. Philosophy's history, as today's student and teachers of philosophy see it, is a retrospective construct. Why? Because if you seriously want to engage in a philosophical project, what you will have to do first is you'll have to read a lot of literature. You want to talk about a problem. You want to talk about a problem. Let's say, what is change? You will have to start from Aristotle. You'll have to start from pre-Socratic philosophers. They have spoken about change. You'll have to look at look at all the prominent literatures that has been written across history, explaining the philosophy behind what change is and what their perspective is and everything. So philosophy's history, as today's student and teachers of philosophy see it, is a retrospective construct. It is chosen from the wider stream of the history of ideas. Remember, as we conceive knowledge today, knowledge is not all philosophy, because back in the day, during the time of Aristotle and before him, knowledge was not segregated. Knowledge did not have branches. It was all one. You are a philosopher, you are a meteorologist, you are a biologist, you are a physicist, you are a scholar. It Having a speciality in one particular discipline is something that is new. It is a modern phenomena. Back in that day, everybody worked on everything. you would have seen a person who would have done work in law as well as in medicine. So that's the reason you have to understand, as we conceive philosophy today, philosophy is a part of knowledge. There are many other parts of knowledge like physics, chemistry, mathematics, MBA, and so on and so forth. It is chosen from the wider stream of the history of ideas in order to provide today's philosophical concerns with their antecedents. Try to understand. The reason we engage in certain philosophical project are for two reasons fundamentally. One, if a problem has been already been discussed in the past, does there exist any relevance of that problem being discussed today? There are many problems that has been discarded and get revived and gets discarded and revived and discarded. But always understand, a problem is always addressed from the point of view of its relevance to today's life, and it is always seen in the discussed in the sense where you take a problem and you look at its history. So that's the reason we say, in order to provide today's philosophical concerns with their antecedents. This fact has to be noted if only to avoid confusion about the words philosophy and philosopher themselves. For almost all of its history, philosophy had the general meaning of rational inquiry. Though, from the beginning of modern times, in the Renaissance, somewhere around 16th century basically, until the 19th century, it more particularly meant what we now call science. Though a philosopher was still someone who investigated anything and everything. Thus, it is that King Lear says to Edgar, "First, let me talk with this philosopher. What is the cause of thunder?" So, the explanation to the question, what is the cause of a thunder, today you might conceive it as a scientific explanation. But that day, as we have seen, philosophers, scientists, everything, there wasn't this special disciplines. You were a philosopher, you were a scientist, you're all at the one. On William Hazlitt's tombstone, engraved in 1830, the famous essayist is described as the first unanswered metaphysician of the age, because at that time, what we now call philosophy was called metaphysics, to distinguish it from what we now call science. So try to understand. Today we have philosophy and science. But what we call philosophy today was called metaphysics back then, and what we call science today was called natural philosophy back then. Okay?
Goutam, let's take question. Ram.
Oh, 1 second. I will just finish the slide.
Okay.
So this distinction was often made by the labels moral philosophy to mean what we now call philosophy, and natural philosophy to mean what we call science. So try to understand. I have highlighted the moral philosophy because there are other philosophical problems alongside with the moral philosophy. So I will discuss that in the next slide. Okay. Questions?
Yeah, Ram here. I have a question. When you said that what is the cause of thunder was a question of philosophy, and probably sometime the explanation stemmed from religion, saying that there is a god of thunder. So how much did philosophy at that point intersect with religion? Because
at which point? Which point? You have to be specific.
Across the history is what I'm saying. Across the history, were philosophy and religion the same, and did they diverge at a point, or like what was the distinction point if they did diverge? If not, were they fundamentally separate from their origin?
There is a fundamental difference between philosophy and religion, but I wouldn't say philosophy takes its. You have to understand, humans had been. So religion and philosophy can be seen in like the distinction between them can be seen in this fashion. Philosophy was always meant in the sense of rational inquiry. Religion, on the other hand, was more of a revelation.
Mm-hmm. But if someone comes up with an explanation about thunder involving the concept of gods, or the idea of that there is a god over there and there is an entity, that is still an explanation.
Yes. There is a beautiful way how philosophers accommodate God in philosophy. René Descartes, for example, who was a scientist, who accommodated God in his philosophy. Yeah,
and in ancient times, when you're talking about, so there is a difference between how philosophers use a god and how a religious argument use a god. So religion cannot differ from the revelation, or what are they, means whatever they are, the books or whatever the text they had. So their inquiry will be based on that only, and philosopher will have a free inquiry that may use the concept of God. Many physicists and many natural philosophers did, as we will see also.
Shall we move on? Is there any other question? Kalpana? So, okay. Yeah. So as I mentioned, moral philosophy and others, basically other philosophical questions. So the other philosophical questions that you come across are epistemological, metaphysical, aesthetical, ontological, language-based, teleological, and the interdependence. I mean, the issues concerning the interdependence of philosophy and other branches of knowledge. Here, interdependence basically means how does philosophy influence the other branches of knowledge, and how the other branches of knowledge influence philosophy. I mean, uh, epistemological issues are concerned with questions such as how do you know what you know. I mean, i- if you take a stance saying this is what I accept about reality, one of the first arguments that will be thrown to you will be how are you arguing what you're arguing? What's your source? Is it reason? Is it sense experience? What is it? So those are the epistemological issues. Then we have metaphysical issues, which are concerned primarily with the nature of reality. Is the is reality primordially one? Is it two? What does it mean when I say reality is one? What does it mean when I say reality is two? Basically, in the sense, like for example, you might look at Advaita Vedanta. You will see in Advaita Vedanta, reality is fundamentally made up of one principle alone, that is the Brahman. Everything else is Mithya. But on the other hand, if you look at Sankhya, the nature of reality is fundamentally made up of two things: Purusha and Prakriti. Obviously, it is in a much complicated sense, where the Purusha is not indulging, and everything that you are experiencing and the phenomenal world around you is basically what Prakriti is. You don't see Purushas around you. Then you have the aesthetical issues. Uh, as a student of philosophy, I've always seen documentaries which talk about why aesthetical issues are much important than metaphysical and epistemological issues. Uh, I think it will be an interesting topic if any one of you might take up and talk about the philosophy of aesthetics and the big problems of aesthetics. Then we have ontological issues. Ontology is in a way related to the metaphysics, but it carries its own weight because there are problems that has not been addressed so far. For example, me and Ram, we were discussing about discussing about substance dualism, for example. That's a problem that falls into the category of ontological issues. Then there are issues concerning language, which should be pretty obvious. So something that wasn't obvious before the 19th century in the West, of course, because philosophy of language gained ground in the West during the 19th and 20th century. Now, philosophy of language is why is it important? Because for obvious reasons, you do philosophy using language. So you'll have to show some scrutiny to the medium through which you are doing philosophy, that is language. Then there are teleological issues. This is again a really important topic, something not discussed in the present academics. So I would encourage one of you to take up this teleological issues. Try to understand teleological issues in philosophy had a huge current during the medieval age. In the medieval period, the scholastic philosophers were immensely concerned with philosophical issues that are teleological in nature, and something that you don't study in the academics extensively. For example, in my case and Himanshu's case and Kalparnav and so on and so forth, in the first semester we had ancient philosophy of Greek. In the second semester we have Western philosophy during the time of crisis, that is somewhere around 17th century to 20th century. But we don't study Western philosophy of the medieval age. We will not study that in our next 2 years, in our 2 years of masters. So it is a really important topic that has to be studied. Then there are issues concerning the interdependency between philosophy and other branches of knowledge. As I explained, how philosophy influences the other branch of knowledge, and how other branch of knowledge influence philosophy. For example, how our conception of our brain or the mind has been influenced by biology in the recent time. Our teleological issues has been influenced by biology. For example, I mean, before Darwin, it was mostly the case that we were the uh, descendants of gods in a way. But later we realized that we aren't the descendants of gods, but basically we are biological creatures and so on and so forth. So that completely changes your teleological motives. In the case of God's descendants, your teleological motive was something else. For you as a Christian, for example, at the end of the day, what you need is salvation. But now, since you are a biological creature, it isn't salvation is what you are expecting, because I mean, no offense to anybody, but there isn't a Jesus Christ out there. We know if we accept biology, Jesus Christ is not there, is what I'm saying. Okay, I'm not saying Jesus Christ is not there. If we accept biology, particularly the evolutionary theory, so you can see how biology is influenced. You will also see how physics influences philosophy. Physics has been this subject which goes hand in hand with philosophy for a longer duration of the history of ideas. The second subject is psychology, and then the other subjects. And even philosophy influences other subjects in a sense of, in the case of their methodologies and everything. So I hope you understood what philosophy is. I hope you have understood something. So now we have to understand why of philosophy. Like in a really simple sense, why do philosophy? Why should we be concerned about? These are statements. Oh yeah, if anybody has any doubt, you can ask. No? Oh yeah, Ram. What's the doubt?
Yeah, more than a doubt. So you have mentioned that these are issues, right? So, like, do one issues affect another? As in, if you look at the issue of language, does it affect the issue of epistemology? As in, because I understand the world through language, then how do you understand also becomes a problem of language?
Oh yeah. That's exactly the reason philosophy of language gained so much of ground in the late 19th and early 20th century. They saw the deepest the deepest epistemological issues are actually linguistic issues. For example, we have a philosopher called Wittgenstein who says, "Give me a philosophical problem." And when people try giving him a philosophical problem, he'll say, "These are not philosophical problems; these are linguistic problems," which created philosophy of language. So you can see how epistemology is related to language in that sense.
That's
We
very
also
interesting.
have an Indian philosophy called the Mimamsa tradition, which is also very critical about language. Himanshu knows more about it than me. You can ask Himanshu about it. So yeah, why a philosophy, or why do philosophy at all? This is These are the statements made by Isai Berlin. Isai Berlin is a Russian British philosopher. You might say, is a great orator. You want to listen to a certain topic uh, when it is explained by somebody. I would say it should be Isai Berlin. He explains things in a very beautiful fashion. So why philosophy? If these things meaning the issues, like these issues that you have seen, if these things, which means these issues, are not examined and left fallow means, for example, you have a land which is highly cultivated. Like, you should use the land in order to create vegetables or whatever that you want to create before the fertility of that land is destroyed. So he says that if you don't discuss about these issues, then what really is going to happen is belief become dogma, imagination is warped, the intellect becomes sterile, so societies decay as a result of simply relying on some comfortable bit of unexamined dogma. If imagination is to be stirred, as a result, as the intellect is to be worked, this is a really important statement here. Try to understand here. The word think is more like a command. It's like I'm saying, think of a blue elephant. It's like that. Okay. So when I say think and so, I want you to think what I'm trying to tell you here. So think. Assumptions must be questioned. Presuppositions must be challenged. The whole thing, as in the issues that we have, has to be constantly looked at, not by too many, and not too much perhaps, but a great, nevertheless sufficient to keep the society moving. Society moves by some degree of parasite, where the children are going to kill, if not our fathers, but the belief of our fathers, and arrive at new beliefs. And this is how development occurs, and this is what progress is. So I consider this a sufficient account, a reasonable account why one should indulge in philosophy. As we can see today in India, not too many people are deliberating in philosophy. As much as we have engineers, we don't have so much of philosophers. That's the reason I have taken up philosophy. If there were more philosophers and less engineers, probably I would have taken engineering. So that's the reason I'm doing philosophy. That's like one of the reasons. Yeah. So we have seen what and why of philosophy. Now we'll look at what and how of physics. The image that you're seeing is something called as the cosmic microwave background radiation. Now, it might seem complicated, but in really simple sense, when you have a philosophical problem, what do? You look at the literatures that has been written across history, and then you go about doing the philosophical. Then you go about philosophizing, right? Similarly, in the case of physics, in order for them to create a really good physics foundation, what they do is they look at the history of the universe. Cosmic microwave background radiation, the profile that you're seeing right now, it's an image that tells us about the past of our universe, how our universe was a billion years ago. Now you might wonder, how can we look at the past? You will have to understand the present day accepted theory in physics is the relativistic understanding of the world. Since we have a relativistic understanding of the world, what it essentially tells us is that time is not as it seems for you, where past, present, and future for you, and past, present, and future for somebody else in some other point of space time. You two people have the same you two people run on the same timeline, but a relativistic interpretation of the universe says no, time moves different for different points in the universe. So even if you are here and you are present here right now, you will still see that the other parts of the universe are relative to you, which means you can infer the history of the universe by looking at the history of the other parts of the universe. And how do you do it? Really simple. Imagine a star which is billions of miles away from you. It has sent a light beam from its location to your location. You do know that it will take at least 1,000,000 years for that light to travel you, right? And you do know that star within 1,000,000 years will be born and it will die. So even the star is taken birth and it dies, the radiation is still reaching you. So it is as if the moment the radiation reaches you, which tells you about the birth of a star, actually right there, the star is dead. But you don't know it because it takes time to reach you. Since it takes time to reach you, you always look at the history of the universe. You never look at how the universe is at the present state, every place, every time. Tell it to me. You can never know that. That is something fundamentally impossible. You can only study the history of universe. You can never study the present day of the universe. Okay, that's because physics accepts relativism. What and how of physics? Now, we'll be looking at this question from a historical perspective. When we say physics, since I'm doing Western perspective, not Indian, since I'm doing Western perspective, what and how of physics goes back as far as the pre-Socratic physics. Why? Because Aristotle classified the pre-Socratic philosophers as physicists because they were chiefly concerned with the phenomenal world and its first principle. For example, we have the pre-Socratic philosophers who wanted to discover that one fundamental principle that is the reason for all the being. Some pre-Socratic philosophers argued the fundamental principle is water. Some people argued it's air. Some people argued it's fire and earth and so on and so forth. I know it sounds really stupid, but try to understand. This is, as Ram had pointed out, this is a time where people had moved from the religious standpoint, anima, to a natural understanding of nature. Back then, before the pre-Socratic philosophers, the nomads, basically, humans who were nomads, basically, their relation to the nature was in the sense of animus, where every other creature has a soul. The stone has a soul, the knife has a soul, the rabbit has a soul, and everything. Basically, it was like we were one with the nature in the sense of reverence, like you respected every kill that you did. But when we move from the concept of religion that is animus to the concept of religion that is rooted with the natural or the phenomenal forces that is that is surrounded you, like you have floods from water, you have hurricanes, you have huge rainfalls, you have earthquakes. So people started to understand that the way God is interacting, the way the first principle is interacting with us is through these it is through these things, that is air, fire, water, and so on and so forth. Of course, there was something called as ether also. Ether is something that was divine in nature, something that is associated to the celestial objects. Um, so the so that probably answers what pre-Socratic physics was all about. Uh, the topics that they used to discuss in physics were especially about the concept of change, substance, causality, and others. For example, if you look at Zeno's paradox is a paradox that is concerned with the concept of change. So there are beautiful TED talks and TED videos on Zeno's paradox. I would encourage you to watch these TED talks at YouTube on Zeno's paradox. The main instruments of the pre-Socratic philosophers were speculation and observation. That answers the question: how did they do the physics back then? Then we have the Aristotelian physics. Remember, the physics as you study today takes its primordial root from the ancient pre-Socratic philosophers, but physics as you study today takes its root from Aristotle, because Aristotle's physics had a huge influence on the concept of university. Okay, so it was Aristotle who first created the taxonomy of physics. So Aristotle's taxonomy, basically, he created the branches of knowledge. So contemplative science, which had metaphysics and physics, practical science, which is ethics and politics, and productive science, which was concerned with aesthetics and products. Products as in any architectural things, any product that you create, for example, this mug or this phone, anything that you create, all these are like concerned with productive science, had a huge influence on the structure of knowledge. The notion of sky as the fifth element has emerged as the misinterpretation. Vishwas, you can turn on your mic. The notion of sky as the fifth element has emerged as the misinterpretation of Akasha. It originally meant more like empty space.
I was actually responding to, hello, Gautam. I was actually responding to Ram's message, the message that he has popped when we were talking about the five elements. So when we were talking about either, he suggested that is it sky. So I just felt like pointing it out at that point.
Okay. Remember, the word ether has really big importance in physics also. If you do bachelor's in physics and master's in physics, you'll study the ether theory. But ether not in the sense of something divine and celestial in nature, but ether in the sense as the medium for light. There was a problem which was concerned about, okay, when sound travels through a medium. It travels through the medium of air or solid object or whatever that you might consider. But sound cannot travel in space because it is vacuum. Light, on the other hand, people imagine similarly, for light, there should be a medium. Without medium, how can something travel? So they thought ether is the medium. If anybody is interested, look at Michelson-Morley experiment. That's a Michelson-Morley. Michelson-Morley experiment explains or debunks is a better term. Debunks the ether theory and shows that light in order to travel doesn't require any medium at all. It can travel in empty space. That theory is true only so far as the Casimir effect. Okay, so people who are arguing vacuum is not really empty, there is something there. Yeah, I know. I know that after the explanation of the Casimir effect, we don't really accept the vacuum to be empty. Yeah, Aristotelian physics. The present day, as we approach knowledge, there is a certain structure to that knowledge, and in a way, the larger contribution to that structure was given by Aristotle. In his physics, the issues are about nature, causal, change, and others. You will see when you really study the Aristotelian works, which is concerned with, Michelson-Morley experiment, which is concerned with physics, you will study in the first chapter, he will discuss about what is nature, what are the different ways you talk about nature, and what are the different ways you use the word or the term nature. And what can be discussed under the heading nature? And then he discusses about the causal principle. And you will see in the case of Aristotle, the causal principle isn't the causal principle as we understand today, that that there is an effect and then there is a cause. But in his causal principle was a pluralistic approach to the causal principle, where you have multiple causes. You had a material cause, you had a formal cause, you had an efficient cause, you had a teleological cause. You had there was a pluralism in causes, and a certain combination of these causes contributed to for something in order for it to become a being or come into being. So it's a really interesting theory. You'll have to look at it. And his causal principle, of course, influenced the modern science. His efficient cause has huge influence on modern science, and the concept of change, of course. So, however, his methods were historical exegesis followed by a formulation. Remember, whenever you whenever you see how Aristotle did philosophy, you will see Aristotle went about doing the historical exegesis first. If he chooses to talk about a certain topic, he always first did a historical exegesis. He first looked at all the pre-Socratic philosophers, what they have said about it, and then he would formulate. So that was his approach. That was his method. Another method was obviously the demonstrative reasoning, and the third being the usage of language. One thing, for example, if you read Nietzsche, you will see Friedrich Nietzsche write from the sense of has a poetic stance. Aristotle, on the other hand, when you read his work, you will see he is very careful about the language he is using. Every word that he says, the particle is, the particle a, the particle the, every word that he uses it carefully, with extreme care. So his method has a really strong language fragrance in a way. You get it? Like there is a huge influence of language.
Goutam, let's take a question from Ram.
Yeah. Questions.
Yeah, you just talked about the bifurcations, right? Of that Aristotle has made. Just wanted to know what's aesthetics and products. Like aesthetics, as in, is it the appearance of things?
No. It is concerned with beauty, but beauty not in the sense of what we conceive as beauty, like Fair and Lovely cream, and not beauty in that sense. Okay, for philosophers, beauty is a technical term. I haven't studied aesthetics. Sorry.
Okay, and products.
Kalparnav, Himanshu, anybody wants to talk about aesthetics? Probably. I'm sure Kalparnav knows something about aesthetics.
Yeah. So aesthetics, we can say Kant also wrote on aesthetics. Basically, the fact is that if a thing is beauty, then how it is beautiful, or what is beauty? These are the things which an philosophy of aesthetics will concern with. Again, a thing is beautiful to some, but not all. Then what is the parameter which makes a thing beautiful to some, but not all? So these are the things in general terms which will be concerned with aesthetics. And we can see that many of the philosophers commented on aesthetics. That is what I will say shortly, because
Gotcha.
Yeah. I can say something about this. Ram, for example, you can ask the question: is beauty an intrinsic component? Is beauty an intrinsic part of an object? For example, is mountain beautiful in itself, or is it beautiful for the viewer?
Yeah.
These are really important questions. In a way, aesthetical questions are much difficult to answer than ethical and metaphysical questions. Trust me, metaphysics in a way is easy. Epistemology is also easy. They are not easy. Okay, I'm not saying easy, but try to understand. Metaphysics you can at least approach. Epistemology becomes a little harder. Ethics becomes even harder. Aesthetics is really, really difficult.
So
you can't.
Yeah, I like not to deviate a lot, but I just had one point or question. Does the origin of beauty have its roots in biology, or as in, because biology? I mean, can a rock find anything beautiful? It's only a life that can find something beautiful.
And then that's a problem of the other mind, no? How do you know the rock doesn't consider the other rock beautiful? How do you know?
Okay, then it's epistemology. Yeah, cool.
And culture may also affect beauty, because it may be a cultural construct also. whether there is an universal concept of beauty, can it be universalized in a sense? Can there be laws like Kant wanted moral laws? Can there be laws of beauty?
Oh yeah, that's it.
Or is it a cultural construct? We consider fairness as an example. So the whole concept is linked culturally. It can also be said. So there are a number of things concerning this aesthetics or conceptions of beauty.
Okay.
Should we continue? Okay. So we had physics of the pre-Socratic philosophers. Then we had the Aristotelian physics. Remember, one can interchange between Socrates and Plato, because largely how we study Socrates is through Plato. And we see that Socrates was not interested in science. He was not interested in physics. That's the reason. It is Aristotelian physics takes a much bigger space in the physics discipline than Socrates. So pre-Socratic, Aristotelian physics, and the third one is medieval physics. Now, what was happening in the medieval physics? These are interesting points. In the medieval period, the questions about the phenomenal world being the world in which you see physical phenomena and everything. In the medieval period, the question about the phenomenal world were classified under the title natural philosophy. Remember the paragraph that we read in the very beginning? It had a dogmatic bent. There was a huge tension between the church and the state concerning who controls knowledge itself. So the church did not let independent scholars to publish work about the cosmology of this phenomenal world, which contradicted the church doctrine. For example, the Copernican theory, which is against the church doctrine, was not accepted until Galileo emphasized it. Okay, though remember Copernicus was a priest. There is a catch. For the first time in history, the study of nature gained permanence. This is a line that is interesting, something that I studied in my first semester here. The creation of universities gave a sense of permanence to science as a discipline. So, if you conceive physics as natural philosophy or anything, it gained permanence during the medieval period. Before the medieval period, everybody, yes, people did talk about physics, did talk about the phenomenal world, but people did it as independent bodies. There was no sense of permanence. Tomorrow, people would have been like less bothered about such questions about phenomenal world. The idea of permanence to science was given in the medieval period. Remember, a lot of ancient terminology was borrowed. There is this account where a large amount of translation and interpretation of the ancient works took place in the medieval time, across the medieval time, and while it did, it borrowed a lot of Latin and Greek terminologies. And trust me, borrowing down terminologies has its own importance, because you can't just create some random word and go about talking what that word means. You will have to create a word which has certain etymological roots, which is used in order to explain something about the world that you live in, or yourself for that matter. And creating these words are not that easy. I mean, I'm not saying this in a sense of challenge, but I want you to provoke a thought. Imagine I want you to become a computer scientist now. Okay, what are the words that you'll cook up in your mind? I mean, I don't want you to study any textbooks of computer science. I want you to create a new computer science branch. How will you do it? You'll have to create new words. And you have to show how these new words are related to all the other new words and all the other words that we use in our day-to-day life, and what is the identity and what is the difference. You'll have to create an extensive body of terms. And that's a task that medieval people were not ready to do. What they did instead was a smart work. They borrowed quite a lot of terminology from the ancient thinkers. And I think that's a practice that is carried out even till today, and it's a good practice. We should always look back at look at the classics. We should always go back to our forefathers. We should always, even though we saw that we have to, if not kill our forefathers, but we have to kill the beliefs of our forefathers. However, we have to borrow a lot of terminology. Now, one baggage that comes with this is the preconceived idea of that terminology as well as the presuppositions of that terminology. We as critical thinkers, what we will have to do is we have to critically analyze what these terminologies mean. And we have to make sure the baggage it carries has been eradicated and a new formulation has to be given. Reason and mathematics were extensively employed. However, faith was not accommodated alongside others. Now try to understand. We saw in the pre-Socratic philosophers, we had speculation and observation as the methods through which you investigated about the physics about the phenomenal world. And in the Aristotelian physics, we saw language, a careful use of language, demonstrative reasoning, and historical exegesis as the methods through which he inquired about physics or the concepts in physics. In the case of medieval age or the medieval period, reason and mathematics had taken up a really good big stage. But remember, it was also polluted with faith, because the church still controlled the knowledge. Like, how should knowledge progress in the West? This is not my statement. These are statements that you can find in any general historical textbooks. There is a huge argument between the church and the state. Next, gave rise to the rudimentary developments of other sciences such as alchemy. You will see chemistry as we conceive today. It was rudimentary. It was alchemy back then, and as the psychology as we study today, which is hugely influenced by the rationalism of Descartes and the positivism of the Vienna School. Today's psychology finds its two roots in the rationalism of Descartes and the positivism of the Vienna School. Psychology during the medieval time was different. It did not find its roots in the rationalism of Descartes or the positivism of the Vienna School. But there was a rudimentary psychology back then, in which discussed about the concept of soul and so on and so forth. Medical instruments. The moment science gained permanence or physics gained permanence, we were becoming much better at controlling nature and creating products that what you might deem as artificial. Artificial is a technical term, trust me. And when I say artificial in the Aristotelian sense. Why? Because medieval physics was hugely influenced by Aristotelian works. Because in those universities, as we studied Kalpana and Himanshu, in those universities, the curriculum was Aristotelian literature. The reason I have highlighted medical instruments is because the philosophy of medicine, or the history of medicine in the history of ideas, when you look at really close with the history of philosophy, you'll see the amount of influence medical as a discipline had on other branches of knowledge is also really surprising. We studied in modern science and modern advent in the last semester. We saw how medical sciences had a huge influence. Yeah. So then we have modern physics. Now, today as physics, when you enter probably the bachelor's degree, you will start learning. Like, you will not be taught pre-Socratic physics. You will not be taught Aristotelian physics. You will not be taught medieval physics. If you join a bachelor's degree in physics at any university or institute in India, where you will start from modern physics. Okay. Yes, there are many other classifications called as classical physics, modern physics, quantum mechanics, and many others. I'm not talking about modern physics in that sense. I'm speaking of modern physics in the sense of Galileo, because Galileo was that individual who is recognized for providing us something really, really important. That is the law of inertia. Trust me, there are few fundamental laws about the phenomenal world. Quantum mechanics can go wrong. General theory of relativity can go wrong. But Galileo's law of inertia and second law of thermodynamics are fundamental to this. You will see existence. There is a certain resistance in this existence, or there is a certain resistance in motion, or there is a certain resistance in knowledge. There is this law, the law of inertia, has a huge impact not only in the case of physics, but also in the case of all the other branches of knowledge. Importance of naive realism. This is a topic that should be discussed in itself. Probably someone can take up the topic naive realism and give a presentation on it. The great bent in physics that was hypotheses and controlled experiments as the means to investigate the phenomena of nature. Remember, under the topic physics, we are discussing what and how. We are looking at what was pre-Socratic physics. We saw what is Aristotelian physics. We saw what modern physics is. But how did they do it? Pre-Socratic philosophers did it through speculation and observation. Aristotle, demonstrative reasoning and historical exegesis. Medieval physics, reason, mathematics, and faith. Modern physics was had its method in the sense of hypotheses and controlled experiments. Himanshu, I'll finish the slide on this. Okay. Physics as a subject starts from here, as studied in today's schools and universities. Changes were made at the levels of cosmology, motion in the sense of dynamic and kinematics, especially in the sense of what explanations account for the physical phenomena. This was the first time in physics where we stopped asking teleological questions. We weren't concerned, for example, what forces influence for some sort of motion. We started doing physics like, for example, kinematics. Kinematics is a branch of physics which is concerned like, regardless of whatever the force was, I'm not interested in it. I don't want the first cause. I don't want the first cause like God or whatever. Whatever the cause was, I want to know the behavior now. You understand? Dynamics, on the other hand, takes into account the cause. Given a certain cause, what will be the effect? Kinematics, on the other hand, given a certain cause, what is the behavior? So we are seeing a new trend in physics, something non-teleological in nature. Of course, this was also the time where faith was tested. In a certain sense, justice was served. Reason won the match. Yeah. Questions? Is it boring? Am I saying something too obvious that you guys know, or am I saying something that you guys don't understand at all?
Not at all.
No, continue. It's actually interesting.
Okay. Any questions? No? Shall I move on? Yeah. Basically, this is a really important image. That is the Tower of. Anybody knows what is the Tower of?
Pisa.
Tower of Pisa. And why is Galileo
the two-bomb experiment?
Yeah, but you know that it's a myth, right? Galileo never went and really did that.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Yeah, but it's a story that has been told in order to explain it to people.
Yeah,
okay.
The same is true for Newton and the
Galileo
apple.
really did it. You have this tendency to believe, okay, Galileo is a big person. He did it. That happened, and I should believe in it also. He's a big guy, no? But the experiment is true. Even if you do it, it is still true that it is the gravity. So basically, the experiment was about gravity. Aristotle argued, more is the mass, more will be the force of gravity. Okay, you take a heavy object, you take a light object, and then you let them go. What will happen? Aristotle argued the heavy object will reach the ground first. Galileo, using his controlled experiment at the Tower of Pisa, demonstrated that acceleration due to gravity is independent of the mass of the object, which means if I have a light object and I have a heavy object and I let them go at the same time from the same height, they fall at the same rate and they reach the ground at the same time. Obviously, you might argue, I have a hammer, I have a feather, which will fall first. Now you will have to take into account the air resistance. Air resists the feather in comparison to hammer. Why? Because hammer is much denser than feather. The experiment that was famously conducted or replicated, the experiment that was conducted at Tower of Pisa and that was replicated on Moon. And there is a clip in YouTube, you can watch it. It's an experiment performed by astronauts where they are holding hammer and a feather and they are letting it go and it falls at the same time. Yeah, Himanshu.
Just one thing is tell something more about this law of inertia, and one addition is that I want to add is that this is the age of experimentation, and they started this age of experiment really revolutionized the whole field of philosophy and physics also. It or you can say it dissected natural philosophy from physics really, and the world ahead is we know it,
Sure, Dheeraj.
Thank you, Dheeraj. Or if you please remember to fill the feedback form. Yes, and the background was their institutions. Means the new universities where they studied Aristotelian literature, logic, and physics, etc., and which was provided to them by a famous translation movement. You will be interested in that, or we can talk about it later.
Sorry, in the discussion session we can.
Yes. And translation movement is related to Arabic philosophy.
Oh.
Just a minute. Yes. Continue. And tell something about law of inertia.
Oh, yeah. The law of inertia. Basically, law of inertia basically tells you that the state of an object will not change until or unless an external force is acted upon it. If an object is at rest, it has a tendency to stay at the state of rest until unless so this phone has a tendency to stay at the state of rest until unless a force is acted upon it. Similarly, if an object is in the state of motion, it has a tendency to stay in the state of motion until unless an external force is acted upon it in order to bring it into rest. And he was the first person to create the relativistic conception of physics. Relativity finds its roots in Galileo. Before we study Einstein theory of special relativity, general theory of relativity of Einstein, you will study something called as Galileo transformations, Lorentz transformations, and hyperbolic transformations, and then you go about studying the theory of relativity in physics. That's something we were made to study. Himanshu, can I answer those? Can I talk about it a little more after the slide?
Yes.
Okay.
And then because we have very few, so you can on your cameras if you want to. Less fewer.
So physics today. Now, how do we conceive physics today? There are four major branches of physics today. One is the cosmological branch, which is basically relativistic physics. Then there is the phenomenal branch, that is the classical physics. There is the atomic and subatomic branch. Now, try to understand, at the atomic level, you go into chemistry, and at the subatomic level, you go into quantum mechanics. Okay, so there are this. I have always seen chemistry as a branch of physics, like as physics as a branch of mathematics. For me, there is philosophy, then there is maths, then there is physics, then there is chemistry, and then there is biology. It's like that because that's how I have been taught. But I have not mentioned chemistry because I hate chemistry. The influence of positivism, especially in the case of verification and falsification principles. Try to understand, physics has reigned for past couple centuries because of the falsification principle. Anybody who can tell us who gave us the falsification principle? Kalpana?
A clue? I'll try. Give us a clue, we'll try.
No. I mean, they know it. Himantu? Falsification principle was given by
Popper. I'm talking about Popper.
And Ram and others do look at what verification principle was and what is falsification principle of the positivistic school. So
one doubt: is this the same positivism that you have mentioned?
Yeah.
Psychology.
Yes.
Positivism of Vienna School.
Yeah. Before Vienna School influenced before it influenced psychology, it influenced physics.
So there were people doing something, and they influenced everything, right? Language, philosophy, physics, everything.
So physics was infected with positivism first, and then psychology, and then sociology, and then many other logies. The principle of reduction and unification and the issues concerning them. So in today's physics, the problems that we face are to do with verification and falsification principle and reduction and unification principles. For example, if you take verification principle, what it basically says it, if I have seen a black crow today, if I see a black crow tomorrow, if I see a black crow day after tomorrow, it mostly the case that there are only black crows. So crow is black. So that's how physics is done if you accept verification principle. But the problem with that is, what if you end up finding a white crow on the fifth day? Falsification principle. And the other problem with that is also, what is the verification principle of the verification principle? How do you verify a verification principle? And then you have the falsification principle, which is in a way a stronger principle than a verification principle. And I think it's a huge topic in itself, and I want you to go look it up. But also, it has its own problems. Reduction is also an important tool in physics, but also a problem in physics. The reason being, we reduce complicated physical problems into simple physical problems, and then we go about solving them. But the problem with reduction is in two ways. You cannot reduce the phenomenal world to a point where you can understand it. For example, how do you reduce consciousness to the physical matter? How do you reduce it? That's the problem. how do you go from reduction to unification? That's another problem. Once you have studied the phenomenal world through reduction, how will you unify what you have reduced? For example, the big problem in physics right now is how do you unify the reduced problems? The reduced problems were 4: gravity, electromagnetic, strong nuclear, weak nuclear. Physics was reduced to these 4 branches fundamentally, and they were studied independently. Now people are trying from the 20th century to unify them, and they are seeing that unifying what has been reduced is a big task in itself. They have been successfully been able to reduce 2 out of the 4. They have been able to reduce 3 in a partial fashion. They have not been able to unify gravity with the other 3. Basically, they were able to unify electromagnetic theory and weak nuclear theory, and the theory that you get is electro-weak theory, which they again tried to unify it with a strong nuclear theory, and in which gives you the grand unified theory and you have the tendency of unification of these 3 with the gravitational theory, which is called the theory of everything. Now, the problem is there is a huge gap between quantum mechanics and general theory of relativity. Now, before I say that, let me talk about the methods. Now, I'll mention this again. We had a conception of physics in the pre-Socratic sense, Aristotelian sense, medieval sense, modern sense, and today. We also looked at how physics was done in the pre-Socratic sense, speculation, observation. In the Aristotelian sense, demonstrative reasoning. In the medieval sense, faith and reason and mathematics. In the modern sense, controlled experiments and observation. Present day, the method is this. You create a hypothesis followed by a postulation. Postulation will lead to a theory, and that theory will give you certain observations, which is followed by experimentation, measurement, and observation. Now, if your theoretically observed value coincides to a remarkable degree of the experimentally observed value, then you might say, yeah, what we are saying is true. But remember, it is not necessarily the case that the theoretically observed value and the experimentally observed value agree with one another completely. No, they agree with one another to a certain extent. The extent to which the present day physicists call it, yeah, you can accept it, is when the theoretical observed value and experimentally observed value has the error or has the acceptance rate of phi sigma. So go look at the phi sigma principle in physics. It's a really important topic. Once you understand phi sigma principle, you will understand that physics has a deep problem within it. Though we accept the explanations about the physical explanations about the universe, we accept that explanation with a pinch of salt. And that pinch of salt is that the theoretically observed value and the experimentally observed value only agree to a certain degree, but not completely. Major problems in physics is basically the gap between quantum mechanics and general theory of relativity, gap between quantum mechanics and classical mechanics, the problem of conscious experiencer, because when you are doing physics, you are a conscious experiencer. The theory of everything, which is basically the reduction and unification problem. So, hard problems.
Let's take a question from
the presentation is about to get over.
Okay, just finish it.
Hard problems in philosophy and physics. This is purely for the sake of discussion, because we can't just talk about some random philosophical and physics problem and go about talking something else. We have to stick to a certain problem. So I think a really good problem would be a philosophical problem for us. The question of meaning. The keywords can be like language, sense, usage. Like you can talk about these things. In the case of physics, you can talk about how can physics explain consciousness. Anybody wants to contribute an explanation to that question? Very well, because we have a few people who are doing philosophy, so they can definitely talk about materialism, idealism, realism, and reductionism. The end, but it will be continued. What will be continued in the next presentation? We will see how and when of philosophy, because we have seen only what and why of philosophy. And in the case of physics, we will see when and why of physics. Okay, we will be looking at in the sense of methodologies. Methodologies. We will also be looking at how physics influenced philosophy and how philosophy influenced physics, and so on and so forth. That covers what is remaining. The topics and the concepts that has been discussed today and the hard problems that has been mentioned today are up for the discussion. summary, I think it was a long presentation, so I think I have pretty much covered up. So I think I should give some room for discussion. I'm sorry, Himanshu.
No, sir. Thank you so much for explaining this to an means even I, a non-physics person who hate physics, understood something. Thank you, Gautam. I think it was good, and best people will tell. So we are up to discussion. We can, I think, till half hour or